Greetings everyone. In this episode, we will learn about maintaining our infrastructure as code environment, namely managing Azure ARM JSON templates stress-free with Bicep language. So why is it beneficial to maintain our Azure infrastructure as code in Bicep language templates? Well, the first issue is that ARM JSON templates are cumbersome and hard to maintain. Second issue is ARM templates don't have much modularization and code reuse. And third issue is that ARM templates are not human readable, as JSON notations are long and primarily created for interoperability between machines. So ARM JSON templates are really not fun to read. And most importantly, it's even harder to maintain if your project is growing and has changes in it. Well, I have a good news for you. With Bicep project and latest Microsoft Ignite announcements on new stable version, we are getting all those benefits in Bicep language. Plus, we'll get tooling support on Visual Studio Code, Editor, and Azure CLI library. So, in this episode, we are going to do the following steps. We will review an existing Azure infrastructure code as ARM JSON template. We'll learn how to convert it manually to Azure Bicep template. We will verify our Bicep language template before deployment. We will deploy our Bicep template into Azure environment, and we will compare our deployment with existing resource in the same resource group. Okay, I'm excited to guide you over these mentioned exercises. Grab your gear and let's start. We are moving toward rephrase. Now we are going to look into our existing Azure portal and resource group where we have our simple storage account. It's not simple, so to say, but it is. It doesn't have too much information in it because it's a single resource within our resource group, my storage resource group. So as you may see, the storage account has following properties. It's a standard storage account. It has geo-redundancy and it's a storage v2 time. It rephrase, and this storage account has a kind storage v2, which is also called general purpose version 2. Now, this storage account is actually provisioned in East US2 region. And because of geo-redundancy, this is the paired region, Central US, where copy of information is replicated. Now, to look into the template, how this storage account actually was deployed as an ARM JSON template, we need to click under automation. We need to click into export template. And here we would see the resource itself and as well as parameters. Under the resource, we can clearly see that it has one parameter and it has resources under the resources array. And namely, we have storage account resource with the parameters and values that I just mentioned. So we are going to create this similar storage account with a bit different name in the same resource group using Azure Bicep code, and you will see that it will be much less code than what we see in Azure ARM template. Now we are moving to the Visual Studio Code to create our first sample storage account. Okay, now I'm in the Azure Bicep project and I have samples folder. Under this samples folder, I'm going to create another file and I will call it my storage.bicep. This bicep extension is something that we need to make sure it's in place so we can use the IntelliSense and support of Visual Studio Code. So as you remember, we had one parameter and I'm going to put that parameter name as a storage name. And as you may see, it has a number of different types. We are going to select the string type, and we are going to call it LinkedIn Geo STG 19, which stands for storage. Then we need to define the resource itself. To define the storage resource, we need to type the resource, then the name of the resource. Let's call it Bicep. And then we need to define the resource type. In our case, we are going to define the resource type, which is Microsoft.storage. And then, as you may see, it has different versions. We'll select the one that we saw on the ARM template. And then we need to define the properties of this storage resource. So once in the property, if you press on Control Space, you will see it will show you the required parameters. We'll start with the name parameter as we defined it first, and we'll put that. Then you don't next, after the pressing on Enter, I'm going to define the location for this resource, and we are going to use the resource group function to get the location information from there. This is actually the best practice to make sure that your resources are provisioned in the same region where your resource group is provisioned. Then we'll define the SKU for this resource, and I'm going to type on Control Space, define the name, which is a standard geo-redundant storage. And then I will define the tier, which is the standard tier. And finally, we need to define the type of this storage, which was the kind. And if you remember, it was storage v2 type, general purpose v2. Now, what we got is the Bicep representation of the storage account. Now let's create this storage account with the new name under the same resource group that we had. So resource group name was mystorage.rg. So let's deploy this actually to let's deploy this storage account into I'm going to type the command az deployment group create, and then we'll define the template file location, which is under the samples file. We have my storage bicep, and then we need to define the resource group. Let's see, resource group name was my storage.rg. And finally, what we need to do is we want to make sure that everything looks kosher, and we can run the pre-flight deployment request against the subscription to make sure that this deployment will succeed and it's not gonna stop in the middle. It's not gonna disrupt it. And to do that, we need to put that -c at the end. Now what's happening is that this is the parameter that I talked about. So we define this deployment we are defining this deployment into the resource group. We defined the template name. Let me scroll up here a little bit. We define the template file name and then the resource group. And what we see here is that we get the response back saying that there would be one resource created. The name is going to be the LinkedIn GeoSTG19. If everything is fine, we'll type on Y and press on to continue deployment. Now I'm going to pause here so that our deployment succeeds. And once this succeeded, we'll be back to look at the result and then review that in our Azure portal. We are stopping recording here. So my dear editor, grab a cup of coffee, get relaxed. Probably in a minute or two, this deployment will succeed. And now we are back. As you may see, our deployment succeeded. And we are moving into our Azure portal. Here we are. We are going to the resource groups and we'll click on resource group my storage-rg. And now we see that we have actually two storage accounts deployed. One was here. It's an existing storage account, and this is the new storage account that has been deployed. If you look at the deployment history, we'll see that there are two deployments. This one was done prior, and this is the new deployment we just did. And if you look inside each resource group, the new resource group we just created, we would see that all the properties are matching. It's a geo-redundant storage, and it's also deployed to East US, West US region. All right, that's it for today. So we did a great progress by transforming. We did a great job, rephrase. We did a great progress by transforming long and cumbersome ARM JSON template into a readable, shorter bicep code that we easily deployed from the comfort of our command line. In the next episode, we will start parameterizing and reusing our Azure resources for more complex deployments.